Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm gonna try to do this little wandering around. Yeah, thank you for coming out. I'm sure you're all here because you like signs, right? Because they're fun. So my name is Darin Rowland. I think I'm gonna double mic here too. I am a sign painter in Philadelphia, but I am originally from Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, I don't know if anybody's from Richmond or been to Richmond, super cool town. Really fun place to grow up for what it's worth. And Richmond's kind of an edgy town. It's a small city, but it has kind of a cool vibe to it. You know, it has like an area that's Gray Street. This is an area where concert venues, it's adjacent to VCU. Sorry to just jump right in, but I'm gonna go for it. This is kind of where you would hang out as a kid. My high school was kind of close to this area, so I went there a lot. And you know, like a lot of kids in the 90s into like things like skateboarding. This is when hip hop is becoming very popular. Graffiti is becoming more popular as a culture. And so around 14, I started to get super interested in graffiti as an art form, as something to do, just something to kind of be a part of. And so, you know, it's kind of always interesting to me, like how people get into things, like why do you play team sports versus like, why do you get into skateboarding or why do you get into graffiti or, you know, what kind of exposes you to these things? And so eventually, hanging out with friends, I went to this wall. This was behind, if you're familiar with there's a band from Richmond, it's a hardcore band, it's relatively popular, it's called Veil. Veil's like sort of band house was on Gray Street. This wall actually faces Broad Street, which is one street over. And they had this wall where they would paint. And so this is painted by Tim Berry and Bo, who are both members of the band, and they were kind of into graffiti. And so this wall was like sort of a centralized area. And when I was 14, I was brought there by some friends that I went to high school with. And kind of the first time that I like saw graffiti in its like true form in person, and it just had an enormous impact on me immediately, just right away. Color, you know, just the scale, all of it being, this one was like what you would see first when you like first got, like when you kind of came off the street. And so I am dyslexic. Shout out to anybody else who's dyslexic in the crowd. Fun times. And so school is rough for kids with dyslexia. It's not really made for you. It's a processing thing that's a little different. And I didn't really think about this when I was younger, but this is a space where for the first time you can kind of like start to explore like lettering where it's not a struggle for you to like get through a class assignment or writing a paper. And you're kind of starting to look at, or at least for me at this one, you start to like look at letters as form. You know, as like shapes, line, color, and how that interacts. And then, you know, there's not a space for it, so you're kind of making it up. You're kind of embracing that like DIY kind of like approach to it. There's no real rules in the same way. You get to kind of make it up as you go. And so that was something that immediately, like, I just liked. I like drawing, so this was like a fun transition. And it's cool, it's edgy, come on, like, it's fun. And spray painting your name is fun. Like, it is, you should try it sometime. You know, this is when I started drawing letters. You know, I started drawing letters at 14. Now, these aren't signs in the same context, but this is exploring that concept of lettering as shape, as, you know, both communicating something, and when you're, you know, in this space, you're, you know, sort of trying to communicate an idea that is yourself, but you're young and you don't really even know what that is. You're just kind of like trying to make things that look cool and that are super fun. And it's super fun. So that was, you know, takes you through high school, and like most kids in high school, you know, in that age, like I was full of angst and ready to go. And so I had to, you know, get going. So I did. College for me was a great transition out of Richmond into something else. I landed here at Temple. Temple was really more about getting out of Richmond than it was, going to college. Coming to Philadelphia was definitely something that I wanted to do, but I don't even know that I really understood what it was as much as I just wanted to try to find something new and do something, different, expansive in that kind of context. So I landed here. Went to Temple. I think my first year I was like a business major for some reason. It was kind of like throwing darts at a board, just picking out a major. A year later, I would change to an advertising major. If anybody remembers, there was a school, Temple used to have a JPRA. This was journalism, public relations, and advertising. Such a weird, combining journalism with advertising, but it's also, I always felt like it kind of exposes itself. It's kind of like letting you know, kind of what's going on here by accident. It doesn't exist anymore. They separated those schools, maybe for a good reason. But through this time, I'm still, very much into graffiti. Kind of just figuring myself out, going through college, got a degree in advertising, or focused on advertising, finished, and wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. I'm sure there's lots of people that you go to college and then you come out and you just work restaurants, right? It's Philadelphia. But I had a mutual friend, or not mutual, maybe it's your friend too. But a guy that I knew for many years, his name's Roger Gassman. He was putting out a magazine and sort of starting his career as a publisher. I don't think I did that. I'm pretty sure I didn't hit anything. Yeah, that went really fast, wow. But I could keep talking through this. So he was putting out a magazine that was kind of a counterculture magazine. It's called While You're Sleeping. It had huge focus on graffiti, but also involved music and other kinds of things in that were cool at that time. And he had put out a book that was focused on DC's graffiti scene, because he grew up outside of DC, and that was kind of sort of an easy topic for him, but also nobody had really put focus in that yet. And it was pretty successful. And so I sort of knew through conversation that he was going to be doing more things like that. Do I need to do anything up in this? Okay. So I knew that he was thinking about doing this book about graffiti on freight trains. I somewhat aggressively told him I was going to do this book with him. I don't really remember him offering it as much as I was just I'm going to be a part of this. I know you're doing this. I want in. And so we wrote this book. This is Freight Train Graffiti. This is, sort of the end of when books were a thing. I know they are still now, but they're not really like they used to be. And so this was really, it's a book about graffiti on freight trains, as the title suggests. And while we wrote it, it's really a compilation of other people's stories, other people's experiences, with a lot of photographs, and sort of defining, the goal was to sort of define this little subculture within the larger graffiti culture. And so that was our approach, and it was very successful. We sold lots of copies, had fun events, but you won't get rich off making a book, unfortunately. Maybe there's people that have books and It's a labor of love. You put yourself out there, but there's not really much to it past that point. And so unless you want to write more books or be involved in that, which I was to some degree, but I started to want to not really tell other people's stories in the same way and kind of focus on my own. But I didn't even really know what that was entirely at that point either. So after this book comes out, I didn't really know what to do next. So I started doing all kinds of random art jobs, still holding a restaurant job, and just kind of trying to make it up. This is another time where graffiti as an art form is starting to be a little bit more accepted. So there's more and more people that are kind of like working in that space. And so that's kind of a concept, but it's, not easy to get your, if you make art, it's not always easy to like have your art take hold and make that be profitable for yourself. So it's kind of a difficult thing to do. So I'm just living, and you guys may know this store Jinx that's in Philadelphia. Mike and I were friends, and Mike Oplak is the owner and sort of, the proprietor, as I've recently heard him refer to himself as, the proprietor of Jinx. And so the first Jinx store was on 4th Street, and he had a sign made that failed. And when I say failed, it just was not primed properly, and the paint started to chip off the metal. And so he needed a new sign. And he approached me, still knowing that I'm in this like sort of creative space, but a little bit not knowing what's going on. And he was a bit more forceful on me and was like, "You're gonna make me a sign." And I was like, I'm gonna make you a sign? He's like, "Yeah, you're gonna do the sign because you can do this and it'll be cool and I need a sign and so you should do this." And so this is a lesson in trusting your friends and what they see in you that you maybe don't see in yourself. And so yeah, this is just making, I put this together and I kind of was like in my mind thinking I'm gonna make a sign, but I wanted it to look different, not like just a conventional sign that I'd seen. I'm like trying to think in my mind, like trying to be a little different. That also comes from graffiti. You can see heavy influences of like graffiti lettering in the sign and the composition of it and the lettering. This sign did exist. It didn't fail. It didn't peel, and it lasts. Today, I think it's hanging in his Washington Avenue store as just like a wall piece. But this is sort of my beginnings. That's the store that was on 4th Street. This is between South and Bainbridge on the right side. Later, he would have a store on the left side, but this is that store. I also did the lettering on the glass. Again, did not know how to do this. Totally was given a challenge and just said, okay. Again, just sometimes things come your way, and it's important to just kind of trust in what's coming your way and try to embrace it. I think at this time, too, I didn't have enough of my own direction to say no to these things. You have your own like fears, but I didn't really have a reason to not do the things he was asking me to do. So I made the sign, and that was kind of it. And I just go back to work in restaurants and doing other things. And, this is like 2008, I think. Maybe, 2007, 2008, somewhere in that range. And so one of the good things about being involved in graffiti and any kind of culture is you meet lots of people. You see people around town, you start to build a social network without even really knowing it. So then in 2009, I was invited to be an artist assistant and participate with a large group of people to work on the Love Letters project. This is Steve Powers' project that's along the L in West Philadelphia. Hopefully you're familiar with it. It's a really cool project. You should check it out. It does require you to take the L out to 69th Street and back. And there are a series of roofs, upwards of, I think it's just over 50 roofs were painted by somewhere around 20 to 25 working artists, all behind his concepts. He had a larger concept that is this story that he built. But he's a person that, as a contemporary artist, uses sign painting as like his medium and message telling way. So for us, as the vast majority of us just being a group of graffiti writers, did not really have the same kind of like contextual beginnings. And so for us, it was like we were coming to just paint, and he was going to tell us what to paint. But what happened, this is the first wall that I painted, and I painted this with someone who's a friend who's also an artist. His name is Patrick Griffin. And this is, Patrick painted the, like the bread and the milk, and I kind of backed him up, and I focused in on painting the letters. This is like also the first time of like structural letters, thinking about format and how to balance lettering in a more somewhat conventional context, but with graffiti it's very loose. You're not really restricted unless you restrict yourself. You know, the things you're making are really, you're trying to do something different and original. This is a space where I was, for the first time, really like learning to do something that has a very clear structure. And Steve had, you know, sometimes they were just like literally just writing it out and saying, this is what it should look like. Sometimes they were more elaborate. Like he had the idea of, you know, clearly what the bread and the butter, spilled milk, and then Patrick sort of realized what, with his direction, like how to do that. And so this is probably the first time where I see signs as a viable path to take for a career, where I'm learning, you know, one, we're spending all day on rooftops in the sun, it's super fun, you're with your friends, you're watching this environment below your feet, so it's like there's a certain level of excitement to it, and this is kind of what gets the bug going in you know, taking it a little bit more seriously. That's Patrick painting. This is another sign that was, I think this is in like 48th Street, I can't fully remember. But you can see that while we're doing things with traditional, you know, lettering that's just very basic, sans serif font on a banner, it's still with spray paint. So this is kind of like this space of moving between what is graffiti into this other sign world, but we're still not really sign painting in the traditional sense. We're not, you know, pulling brush strokes. We're not really even engaging that space. We have visual like goals that we're trying to make, but we're not really doing it for what it is to be a sign painter. I put this in image because you see that brush in the bucket, but it's all still spray paint. But there's a space where it starts to change for us. And I don't really remember if it was real direction or just kind of like how do you achieve the best looking thing at the end. Steve was painting with a brush at that point, but for the most of us, the fastest way to get that done was still spray paint. And we're still moving towards this brushwork. This is a sign that was part of the project. A few signs were made that were added on to help with sponsorships and things of that nature. And so this one is maybe the first time I'm really dialing it in with a brush and looking at lettering that's very clean, you know, somewhat basic in context to like what I was doing before, but trying to really understand it. This is done on parachute cloth, which will then get applied to the building. You can see it at the far left side. It was added on. I also painted all of the phrasing where it says for the mural arts program funded by the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage through the Philadelphia Exhibition Initiative. And I was really scared that I wouldn't fit it. So I did it backwards with spray paint, starting with the last letter and working my way over. And I didn't fit it. You'll notice that Steve is in brick, or is on the brick in black, Powers being on, or in reverse. And he made it work because he's creative. But this again is like really a place where in my brain, I'm starting to see these possibilities and starting to make these connections and starting to really kind of like understand that what the differences are between what I had been doing and kind of what I wanted to move towards. But I still knew nothing. I really am making it up as I go along. You know, there's some direction, but there's not really any direction. There's no school to sign up to, at least that I'm aware of at that point. And so, but it's cooking in my brain. But the project ends, And so I'm back to just making stuff up again. At this point, I'm starting to kind of like know more people in the city. I've done a couple art shows with groups, one at 1026 when it was down the street on Arch here, and starting to kind of get a feel for trying to realize how to be a professional. So this was a commission job that I did for a couple people. This is on their rooftop. They had a roof deck, the era of the beginning of roof decks being on every building in Philadelphia. I did some carpentry. If you went to, there's a swim club in Northern Liberties. I built the bars there with a group of people. Also super fun, but was not really like what connected for me. There's one of the bars. I don't have photos of this, but years later I would come back and actually do a whole bunch of lettering behind this bar. But again, I don't have the photo of it, so. Still trying to kind of make things up here again. Having fun, but Then in 2012, this is 3 years later, I've been dabbling in all types of different things. And now Mural Arts has had it for a while, but they have a department called the Restorations Department, and they maintain their murals. And so after a mural has been up, let's say the stucco has fallen off one part, or the colors have faded, they'll come back and they refresh the murals. That they kind of maintain that. So it was time to maintain these murals. Spray paint fades fast. And so most of these had some level of color saturation loss. So this was pink, but had pretty much just turned into white. And so they said, well, you gotta come back and we're gonna paint some of these over, but this time, all brush. No spray paint, everything's done with buckets and brush paint. And so this is that complete switch to the next thing. And so this will be a time where, again, every step seems to be kind of leading me in this way to what's going to become, sign painting, but it takes time to get there. This project ends, and finally, there's kind of a little bit more of like opportunities. This is Popcorn's tattoo was on 5th Street in North Philly. It's not there anymore. It's kind of a legendary tattoo shop if you know people that are into tattoos, not because of the tattoos they made, but just like how wild and crazy this place was. The original design is by a friend of mine who worked on Love Letters with me. His name's Tim Bottalucco, and he was friends with a guy who was tattooing at Popcorn's and said, we want to have a sign. And they came up with this cool idea of doing a popcorn and Gucci chain, because why not paint a giant Gucci chain? I'm not sure how that related to tattooing at all, but it was like super fun. And so this, again, it's still using spray paint into making the Popcorn's logo, but starting to kind of understand how to like finding the right gold paint to paint an exterior building that lasts, right? And like really choosing these kind of mediums and like understanding what's the proper thing to do. Again, just having fun, not knowing if you're doing it right, but experimenting and enjoying that process. And then what happens with sign painting, and which is a fun thing, is that a neighbor will say, you can come paint my sign. And so this place was across the street, and is just a Metro PCS, and the guy wanted it to be personalized. So he just asked if we could paint a sign. And you just say yes, again, just kind of just saying yes to everything. And so the City Wireless letters are the first time I'm going to really conceive of this as I'm going to go with brush, I'm taking my format, I'm making a pounce pattern. Pounce patterns are a way to, part of this is a pounce pattern, part of this is drawn. I drew the City Wireless just with China marker, just right to the brick and kind of working it out. And then the repair, unlock, and music, I used a pattern. Pounce patterns are one of the oldest ways of Design transfers, if I remember right, it comes from, it's a textile pattern moving process that then gets utilized for doing signs. It's still utilized in quilting. And where you take the design that's on paper, you perforate the lines, putting little holes in, you'll put a chalk or charcoal powder through that, pull your pattern down, and it will leave you your pattern to then paint with brush, and you can dust it off and move forward. I also, though, did not know really what I was doing still, and there are lots of sign brushes. They're all utilized for different surfaces, different styles. I showed up to paint this brick with a natural haired brush that is used for oil paints, and I thought, okay, I'm ready to go. And within about 30 seconds, I had ripped out half of the natural hair bristles right over the brick, because that's not what you paint brick with. Fortunately, I had like a cheap like Purdy brush and was able to like make it up really fast. And then I could switch to using, I did use that brush on the metal, you know, learning what's the right way to do it. So I'm in now. I'm in. I painted a sign. I'm ready to go. Back to my friends. Jinx as a store had been around, and he's now starting to transition into doing what we know now as his like vintage variety store. And so he had to have a vehicle. You got to have your name on the side of your vehicle, right? Like you can't, you know, you got to advertise everywhere. So again, he was like, okay, you've done this thing. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to expand. You're going to paint my van. I was super excited to paint his van. It was a lot of fun. Borrow a friend's warehouse. If you can borrow a friend's warehouse, that's fun. So I borrowed a warehouse for a week and just parked it in there and wrestled with this. And yeah, it came out good. It was fun. This is his idea, and then my execution of a fun light bulb. Maybe you saw this around. It lasted for a while. We did a couple of them, actually. This is also the time of social media's like sort of advent as a communication and free portfolio for all of us that use it to highlight our work and to put it out there and make new clients. This is the beginning of that. I did not do it intentionally thinking that. I just wanted to be able to share and put things out, but it immediately led to this. American Mortals is a salon, still around, different owners now, but this was the first time I went to a meeting where you have to sell yourself and pitch yourself. Everybody remember your first meetings? First time you had to go in there and you're like kind of nervous and scared, and you're going to tell somebody that you can execute something that you're not really sure you can execute, that you're still kind of like trying to figure out. This was that. Fortunately, because it's a hair salon, this was their second location that they were opening. So the first one was on Walnut Street, maybe still is there. And so I didn't have to go to like a meeting room. I just sat at in the chairs where you would sit to wait to get your haircut, which was great because it's kind of disarming and it's way more casual. And it was successful because I got the job. Again, this one was full transition. Now I'm a sign painter in my mind, right? Like there's no space where they tell you, okay, you're that now. But this one was a space where I had that internal feeling of I'm doing the right thing, you know? That's like, I'm finally letting go of some of the like, what do I do now feeling, and moving into a more confident space and learning while you're earning. You know, we do it forever, hopefully, and this is that. All those little black lines took an absurd amount of time. I don't know that I've ever painted that many like lines in this kind of a design context again, but it was super beneficial for me at the same time to like go through that process and struggle with it. Brooklyn Flea. You guys might remember Brooklyn Flea. It was here for a little while. It was this is kind of the, this is also kind of the era where craft was becoming more readily popular. And so flea markets are becoming a more of a thing for people to go to. There's more space for this kind of working. And so this is a friend of a friend came to town and he took over Brooklyn Flea. He moved here from New York, needed an A-frame sign. I was fortunate enough to be in my network where I got that. Brooklyn Flea decided Philadelphia was not a good market and they closed. He decided it was a good market and changed it to Franklin Flea. And so that's my first A-frame sign. And at this point, I'm starting to get a little bit of traction and starting to learn more, but I don't really have a good course to follow. I'm just, again, making it up, but that's really an important thing to embrace. I've heard it discussed that like, when you work in any kind of field for so long, you start to follow these like rigid rules and how to execute execute jobs and the way that you do things. And there's something fun about the experimental phases and what you learn and kind of breaking the rules and coming up with different ways to do things and figuring that out. And that's one thing that I've always kind of tried to hold on to, even though once you get into it, you know what you're doing and you're just going to start moving through. So around this time, Jinx will open a second store on the other side. They will move to the Piazza, then he'll open a second store. And when he opened the one on 4th Street, that was on the left-hand side, he had started working with a guy, his name's Christian Cantiello. He's also a sign painter in Philadelphia now, who was just starting out at the same time. So he's like, I want to put you guys together because I like what his design work is, but he's never painted anything for me, and you've painted things for me, so why don't you guys work together? So again, trust your friends, trust in what people see in you, and take advantage of these things. I was a little put off at first, like, you don't like my designs? Like, why do I got to deal with this guy? But Chris is a really nice guy, and it was totally fun, worked for us in that time frame. And we painted another Jinx sign that was on the side of that building. And we were both kind of in this parallel space of working in a restaurant, but wanting to do this sign painting thing. And so Chris got a job working out in Phoenixville for a place that's Nelson's Ice Cream. You may know Nelson's Ice Cream. They don't really exist anymore that I understand, but they were a local, ice cream's from Philadelphia. I don't know if you guys know that. It is. I don't know if they invented it, but most of the major ice cream companies in America have roots in this city, Nelson's being one of them. So Chris had this job and wanted me to help him out, and so this is reverse glass window painting. I did not know that you did it on the inside. Chris did, which was super beneficial because you want it to last. And so he has a grand concept of designs that he's gonna put together for us. I'm really there just to help execute, but that was really awesome and super fun for both of us. It was a lot of learning, a lot of figuring it out. Things like the coloring on this sign, how much detail, I think we made up in the store. We debated on, do we do 2-color drops, 3Ds? Should we put a drop shadow on this? How much time will it take? And when you're still experimenting, you don't feel like you have to, we're not making money. We're making money, but we're not really making money if we count the hours. It's not really happening. We're just kind of getting it done. But this job really is the space where now it's I've got somebody to work with. He knows a lot of things I don't know. I know some things he doesn't know, and we'll keep going. Temple University, or Tyler, I should say, moves onto Temple's main campus around this time, and the gallery opens, and Robert Blackstone reached out to do some light work there. These are the first time I painted paper. Paper signs just seemed so random and weird to me, but again, this is just, I put this up here because it was like, one, I was like, free relationship advice, this is so weird. These are his concepts too, but it was just about learning what you were doing at that time and taking a challenge that seemed simple, but in that process, learning more. This is another one through Chris. And we were hired by Blue Cadet, who was going to do the layout. They do museum design, they do digital design. And this is the Mural Arts, I believe, 35th, sort of like anniversary show at PAFA. And their concept, Blue Cadets, was to bring hand-painted designs in with the photographs and various aspects of what mural arts does. And so this is their design concepts, and we're going to execute that. And this is a fun space to remove sort of like a little bit of the ego that it comes from making your own designs and recreating what somebody else is doing. And so it's the first time where I will work with an art director who had very specific guidelines. Working with Steve he had guidelines, but was also very much in letting us kind of experience the space and bring what each one of us had to it. This one was way more rigid, and in that context, you learn to work with your parameters. And you're trying to get to this end goal, but it needs to fit. And making that fit is its own challenge that comes with it. A lot of it's a big learning process. So this is like our lettering on, and they would give us. So they gave us what they wanted, and then allowed us to kind of work with some traditional fonts that they had picked out and that we would draw. So all of this lettering is hand-drawn or designed on a computer and then translated to that. And you can see how it gets utilized once the kind of end goal. There's Chris painting. I'm going to start to use this computer. And there's your end results. And so this is a little bit more of like seeing the lettering interact with vinyl lettering and getting an experience of what kind of, again, learning. This whole process was about learning for me. And trial by fire, but understanding what makes sign painting also appealing in a lot of ways. There is a softness to hand-painted lettering. There is a aesthetic that only is kind of created in that space. And this is the space, this is the time where that really comes together for me. I'll start to move a little bit faster here. This is the entire exhibit, kind of like panned back. I'm going to just run through a bunch of fun jobs. Barcade, if you've ever been there to play pinball, super fun. This is an annex sign. This was an A-frame made with interchangeable panels. This one I designed and just kind of tried to get the quality of the building. It's a historical building, but they needed to sell to modern renters. Broad Street Movers, hopefully you've seen a Broad Street Movers truck around town. I've painted a bunch of them. This is one of my favorite color combos. This is the design is actually made by the owner who just had a concept that he wanted to get executed, and I was fortunate to be able to bring it in and bring it to life. Some more fun lettering. Union Roofing. This is like experiencing large-scale lettering, similar to what we did with what I'm doing with like on love letters of scale, but this is billboard level, kind of a concept. I did a couple of those. Wolf Cycles. This is, once I had kind of like got my bearings, I started to have an understanding for how to utilize, style. And with sign painting is always kind of a merger of like the antique, things from the lettering styles that have been developed in the 1900s, but how do you modernize that? How do you make that into something that reads in a modern situation? I've always enjoyed the use of borders and how that kind of like adds shape and structure to a sign. No Borders, original clay studio, that's on 2nd Street. Also on 2nd Street, Art in the Age. A lot of these, a couple of these places aren't around anymore, and that's like one of the fun things about being a sign painter is you get to watch how things evolve around you, and you get to be you get to participate in the city and its evolution and how it changes. Miss Rachel's Pantry is a vegan catering spot that's in South Philly. This is a logo that I designed with Rachel. Again, use of borders, playing it together. If anybody likes Surfside, it's made by Stateside. Stateside's locally made vodka. Again, this is another logo designed by the owner, who just had a great concept and leaned into it. Super fun to paint. Lots of lettering for a juice bar. This was in Rittenhouse. This one was a bit of a challenge for me in kind of utilizing different fonts, but it's kind of embracing that concept of fonts that are, probably why a lot of people like signs, right? You like letters. You enjoy, what does each kind of like style communicate? And then I had a few more slides. They're not on here, but that's okay. A big part of this whole talk and really kind of even like with the theme of soft is that this has all been a learning process for me and kind of like understanding what it is I was doing without really having any real hard rules or things to follow in that context. And so today, this photo shows a little bit more of a selection of signs, and it gives you, like the T at the top is Trent. That's a factory that was painted a couple months ago. Mad Cow's also a new local boutique that's on 2nd Street. Transoms, the 1920 that's in the middle on the right. Transoms, I didn't know what a transom was until somebody asked me to paint it. And then I learned that, sort of that process in terms of like painting a sign for your house. And, it's a little bit of a simple idea, but I think everybody should have their own sign, right? Like everybody should have something that represents you and makes you feel good about your space. And so that was, I've painted probably, maybe up to 100 transoms at this point, which is kind of weird to say out loud, but it's kind of true. I have some clients that this is what I do for them, they're developers. But I think in a lot of ways that simple idea of just putting yourself out there and having something that represents you, it's what, in some ways was attractive in graffiti, and it's a way that like I was able to put myself out in an autonomous way, but something that's visual that I see passing by regularly, and that you kind of know other people are having that response with you. Sign painting is very much a similar way, and I enjoy, working in the city, being a part of the city, having, seeing a Broad Street Movers truck on the highway or in my neighborhood is like one of the most rewarding things that happens to me. And I also, hope that other people see those signs as like landmarks in their day-to-day. Like, the sign that you see when you're going to make a right turn. And that becomes something in your mind that you just sort of experience. Maybe you don't think of it in the forefront, but that space to me is something I've always very much enjoyed about sign painting and how that, is a communication for everyone. So that's kind of it.
All right. That was awesome. Thank you.
All right, good.